The Cardinal and the Cat. An epilogue of Trumaine Marnel-Farr. 50 years after the last great deeds of the Silver Gauntlet, Cardinal Trumaine Marnel-Farr still wrote. He wrote in a chamber high within the Basilica of the Eternal Star in Thyatys City, where white towers rose above red-tiled roofs, and bells marked every hour with bronze voices. His room was narrow, though the Church of Istar would gladly have given him grander quarters. It smelled of old parchment, lamp oil, binding glue, and the dust of 1,000 forgotten years. Every wall held books. Books stood upon shelves, lay open upon tables, and gathered in precarious towers around Trumaine's chair. There were histories of kings, chronicles of wars, accounts of miracles, confessions of heretics, lists of martyrs, and testimonies written by frightened hands beneath the light of dying candles. Trumaine was the keeper of them all. He had long ago ceased being the young priest who marched beside heroes. His shoulders had stooped, his hands trembled, and his once dark hair had become a thin white crown. Age had drawn deep lines across his face, but his eyes remained bright whenever he spoke of the old days. He wrote of Sir Valeric's Starshield and the shining charge of the Silver Gauntlet. He wrote of Laurentar de Sanchez and the impossible workings of her magic. He wrote of Flamric Hydramist, though he often paused, sighed, and scratched out whatever he had written, because no orderly sentence could properly contain Flamric. He wrote of Wes Waywind and his long adventures, his humble countenance, and his defence of those who could not defend themselves. He wrote of Wick Talloman, stern and unyielding, standing before the throne of Tether, while the shadow of Grazist lay across the land. He wrote of the perfect tools, and the terrible days when demon princes walked beneath mortal skies. He wrote of priests who held broken gates, of common soldiers who would not flee, and of humble servants of Istar whose names appeared nowhere else. Heroes already have songs, Trumaine once told a young archivist. It is the duty of history to remember those who had only courage. For 20 years, a tabby cat had assisted him. At least, that was how Trumaine described the arrangement. The cat had appeared one rainy autumn evening, wet, hungry, and entirely unwilling to accept that the cardinal's chambers were closed to animals. She slipped past the guards, climbed 6 flights of stairs, entered through a door that 3 acolytes swore had been locked, and jumped directly onto Trumaine's desk. She sat upon the page he was writing and looked at him. "You are in the way," Trumaine said. The cat blinked. "You cannot remain here." The cat yawned. Trumaine called for someone to remove her. The cat vanished. That night, she slept upon his pillow. From that day onward, she followed him everywhere. She attended councils from beneath his chair, slept through sermons upon the altar steps, and stalked solemnly behind him during processions. She was present when Trumaine examined forbidden manuscripts, and when he recorded the last words of dying knights. The clergy called her Cardinal Pause when Trumaine was not listening. Trumaine called her Bastia after his wife. It seemed right somehow. He could never explain why. Sometimes, when his hands hurt too badly to write, the tabby curled against his wrist until the pain eased. When nightmares carried him back to battlefields and demon-haunted thrones, he awoke to find her seated upon his chest, purring like a little mill wheel. And when he read his histories aloud, she listened. She always listened. Far to the north, in the walled town of Loudwater, Trumaine's son had grown into a man of quiet importance. Bastian Marnel-Farr served as Archbishop Wick Talloman II and as Master of Secrets for the Church of Istar. He held no grand army and rarely stood behind a pulpit. His power lived in locked cabinets, sealed letters, overheard confessions, and the careful silence between 2 spoken words. Some said Bastian knew everything that happened within Loudwater before the city watch did. This was not entirely true. The cats usually knew first. They gathered on the cathedral walls, slept beneath council tables, wandered through kitchens, and watched from the window-sills of noble houses. They passed unnoticed through stables, barracks, alleys, and bedrooms. They heard the conspirators whisper, the merchants lie, the guard captain's doubt, and the frightened prayer spoken by someone who believed no living soul was near. Then, in their own fashion, they told Bastien. A black cat might leave a stolen ribbon upon his window-sill. A white kitten might scratch 3 times at the western door. An old tomcat might stare pointedly at a visiting dignitary and hiss. To others, it was merely the strange behavior of cats. To Bastien, it was a language. His mother had taught it to him. He remembered Bastia as a beautiful woman with dark, clever eyes and a smile that made solemn priests forget what they meant to say. She had come into Trumaine's life like warm sunlight through stained glass and had departed just as mysteriously. Bastien had inherited her eyes. He had also inherited her secrets. On a winter evening, as snow gathered upon Loudwater's walls, every cat in the city fell silent. Bastien noticed at once. 100 familiar voices vanished from the hidden corners of his awareness. Cats sat upon roofs and beneath eaves, all facing southwest. Then a scarred orange tomcat entered the cathedral, walked through the nave, and placed a narrow strip of crimson cloth at Bastien's feet. It smelled of incense, parchment, and the sea. Thyatis. Bastien closed his eyes. "My father," he whispered. The orange cat touched its brow to his boot. Bastien left that same hour. Beneath Loudwater laid a sorcerer's gate, known to few outside the highest circles of Istar's church. Wick Talloman himself opened the sealed passage and embraced Bastien before the threshold. "Go," the old archbishop commanded. "Do not allow duty to steal the last words between a father and his son." The gate carried Bastien to Karamakos in a single stride. From there, church horses, imperial roads, and a waiting ship bore him onward to Thyatis city. Yet all the while, he felt that he travelled too slowly. Cats watched him from milestones. Cats waited upon docks. Cats sat upon the roofs of roadside shrines, their tails wrapped neatly around their feet. Every one of them seemed to know where he was going. Trumaine lay in a small bed beside the window of his library. The physicians had offered rare elixirs. The priests had prepared powerful prayers. There were rites capable of restoring failing flesh, drawing strength from the heavens, or purchasing a few more years from death. Trumaine refused them all. "I have borrowed enough time," he said. "A historian should know when a tale has reached its final page." Bastien entered shortly before dawn. For a moment, he did not see the mighty priest of Istar, or the cardinal whose letters could move armies. He saw only his father, frail beneath white blankets, his breathing shallow, one ink-stained hand resting upon an unfinished page. Trumaine opened his eyes. "You took your time," he murmured. Bastien laughed despite himself. Then he knelt beside the bed and took his father's hand. "You crossed half the world many times for less reason." "Yes," Trumaine said, "but I was younger, and Flamric was usually doing something dangerous." They spoke quietly as the darkness faded. They spoke of Loudwater and Wick. They spoke of Bastien's childhood and the secrets of cats. Trumaine asked whether his histories would be protected, and Bastien promised that they would. At last, Bastien asked the question he had carried all his life. "Did you know what my mother was?" Trumaine looked toward the library door. "No," he said. "Not at first." A soft scratching came from the other side. The door opened. The tabby cat entered. She walked slowly through the chamber, passing beneath the watching eyes of priests, physicians, and acolytes. None dared stop her. She jumped onto the bed and settled beside Trumaine's failing heart. His fingers touched the fur between her ears. "Bastia," he whispered. The cat began to purr. Golden light filled the room. It did not blaze like fire or descend like the stern radiance of Istar. It came softly, like afternoon sunlight falling through leaves. The tabby's shape lengthened and unfolded until a woman sat beside Trumaine. She was beautiful, dark-haired, and golden-eyed. Jewels shone at her throat, and the shadow behind her possessed the graceful ears and tail of a great cat. Her smile was warm, secretive, and ancient. Bastien stumbled backward. "Mother?" Bast turned toward him. She appeared exactly as he remembered her. "You haven't aged," Bastien said. A trace of mischief touched Bast's smile. "I know." Trumaine watched her from the bed. His failing eyes, dimmed by age and too many nights spent bent over ancient pages, now shone with sudden clarity. For a moment, he seemed younger. Bastien could almost see the priest his father had once been, the traveller, the chronicler, the companion of heroes who had looked upon miracles and monsters and refused to turn away. "Bastia," Trumaine whispered, "you are here. How I have missed you. Tell me truly, are you a goddess?" The candles bent toward her, as though moved by a wind no mortal could feel. Beyond the library windows, cats began gathering upon the rooftops of Thyatis City. They came silently. Tabbies, mousers, pampered palace cats, scarred alley toms, and tiny kittens carried by their mothers. Across distant seas and beneath unfamiliar stars, the bells of forgotten temples stirred. Bast looked down at her husband, and her ancient golden eyes softened. "Some would say so. In far-off lands, there are altars raised in my name. Today, they will celebrate, for Bast's true love will live with her forever." Trumaine's breath caught, not from pain, but wonder. Far beyond Thyatis, priests in sun-washed temples lit bowls of perfumed oil. Children crowned temple cats with flowers. Musicians plucked golden strings beneath painted images of a woman with feline eyes. None of them knew Trumaine Marnel-Farr's name, yet all raised their voices in celebration of the mortal whom their goddess had chosen. The old cardinal considered this in silence. Then he gave a faint, almost embarrassed smile. "Are you Istar?" Bast leaned closer. One hand rested against his weathered cheek, while the other covered the faded symbol of Istar lying upon his breast. "No, my love," she answered, "but Istar is in us all." At those words, something warm passed through the room. It was not the commanding radiance of divine judgment, nor the terrible brilliance Trumaine remembered from ancient miracles. It was gentler than that, the light within a stranger's mercy, the courage of an ordinary soldier, the hand that lifts the fallen, and the small flame kept alive against a vast darkness. Trumaine closed his eyes. "All these years," he murmured, "I searched for Istar in histories, relics, and revelations." "And did you find him?" "Yes." His fingers closed weakly around Bast's hand, though rarely where the church told me to look. Bast laughed softly, and the sound carried the warmth of sunlight upon stone. "That is often the way with gods." Bastien looked from his mother to his father. "You were here all these years?" 20 of them, Bast replied. "Your father was never good at caring for himself." Trumaine managed a faint laugh. "You put your tail in my ink. You ignored me when I did not. And the pages you pushed from my desk? Poorly reasoned. One was a papal decree, especially poorly reasoned." Even Bastien laughed then, though tears stood in his eyes. For a little while, death waited beyond the library door, and the three of them were simply a mother, a father, and their son reunited at the end of a very long tale. At last, Bastien looked at his mother. "Can you save him?" Bast answered with neither anger nor sorrow. "I could offer him more days. Others have already done so. He does not want them." Trumaine squeezed his son's hand. A life need not last forever to be complete. Bast bent and rested her forehead against her husband's. For the first time, the goddess's ageless face showed the weight of passing years. "You wrote the stories of everyone but yourself," she whispered. "Someone had to hold the pen. Then let others write what came after." Trumaine looked once more at Bastien. "Listen carefully," he told his son. "People will entrust you with many secrets. Some must be revealed. Some must be buried. Wisdom lies in knowing which is which." "I understand." "No," Trumaine said gently. "But you will." Then Bast kissed him. His final breath left him without struggle. For one heartbeat, the room was utterly still. Then the blanket sank, and in the place where Cardinal Trumaine Marnel-Farr had lain, sat a small grey cat with white paws and ancient, intelligent eyes. The cat looked down at itself. "Oh," it seemed to say. Bast laughed, a sound like bells, purring, and rain upon a warm roof. She lifted the grey cat into her arms. "Come, husband, there are older libraries than this one." The golden light gathered around them. Bast looked once at her son, pride shining in her eyes. "All cats whisper," she said, "but only the wise understand what should remain a secret." Then goddess and cat vanished. The histories of Cardinal Trumaine Marnel-Farr remain in the Basilica of the Eternal Star. His accounts of the Silver Gauntlet are still read by priests, knights, scholars, and children who dream of becoming heroes. His final page was left unfinished. Bastien never allowed anyone to complete it. Years later, however, librarians began telling a peculiar story. They claimed that a small grey cat sometimes appeared among the highest shelves after midnight. It wore no collar and left no tracks in the dust. It could often be found curled beside some forgotten chronicle, particularly one containing the name of a common soldier, a humble priest, or a hero overlooked by grander histories. Those who approached directly saw only an ordinary cat, but those who glimpsed it from the corner of an eye swore that it sat upright like a scholar, carefully turning the pages of an open book with one white paw. And sometimes, if a passage contained an error, a little line of fresh red ink appeared beneath it by morning.